Department Store.
Today's episode of Killer Shipwrecks is brought to you by Terry's Turpentine, offering natural solvents of unnatural quality.
Life jackets are stored in overhead racks on the second deck, and in storage boxes on the top deck. Instructions for donning life jackets are located around the vessel.
Episode 10.
Number 10, very significant, double digits.
There was some doubt, some question in our mind, when we switched to a new platform this year.
Seems like ages ago.
Yeah, and we wondered, are we even gonna get to 12 episodes? But
We didn't know. No, we sailed off into unknown territory, if you will.
Super courageous. Fantastic ship last week, and it completely messed with my plans for this week.
Wow.
Because I was really excited to do a shipwreck where they find some bodies, they find some bones, and then you did the Mary Rose, and there were 92 complete skeletons recovered, and I was like, okay, I'm never gonna match that. That's like
Tough. From a numbers perspective, hard to match.
It's like a cemetery. Yeah, it was like an underwater cemetery down there. My point is that I was all ready to look for a good ship where they recovered some bones, and then I was like, what's the point? So I went in a different direction this week, but I'm going to try to be more disciplined and not go so heavy on the biography this time.
I had no problem with it, but I just don't want to cut into market share with killer biographies coming soon.
And, we owe it to our sponsors to
Sure.
keep it kind of lean. You know what I mean? Like, get right to the point. So with that, anchors away, let's get started. I want to take you to Europe today to start. It's right at the end of World War II. And
Okay.
unlike America, which came out of World War II with the economy booming, just going like gangbusters, Italy had a rough go in World War II. They sided with the wrong team. They signed up with the Axis instead of the Allies, so that was one mistake.
Problems.
They came out of the war with a lot of problems. The economy was not strong. A lot of their ships had been
They
wrecked.
tried fascism, didn't work.
Yeah, they tried the fascism. So one of the things that they did do after the war was they built a couple of really nice boats, passenger liners, like big, fancy cruise boats that would, go across the Atlantic to New York. One of them was named the Andrea Doria. Does it ring any bells?
That sounds so familiar. Was there a musical or was there some song written about this boat?
Beats the shit out of me.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds very familiar.
The Andrea Doria was ready by the early 1950s, and it was described as not the biggest passenger liner operating in those days, nor was it the fastest, but it was considered the most beautiful. Really classic, beautiful Italian design and like valuable art on it. Some people described it as a floating art museum.
Wow.
Had 3 separate pools, one for each class of passengers on the ship.
Wait, what year was it constructed?
Launched in 1951, makes, I think, roughly 100 trips across the Atlantic. It does 50 round trips, basically, on its route. It starts in Genoa.
Genoa is the birthplace of Christopher Columbus.
Fantastic. And that is its home port. And it's named for a guy who was a famous navigator back in like the 15th century or 16th century.
Wow.
Also a Genoese guy. Anyway, the year that we're going to be interested is 1956. The Andrea Doria is on one of these trips from Europe to New York. It's almost done with the trip, basically. It's 12 hours away from New York. It's got, let's say, roughly 1,000 passengers and 500 something crew. The captain is a very experienced guy named, let's make sure I pronounce it correctly. Calamai, not calamari, calamai.
Is this guy an appetizer? What is this guy?
This guy was
He's known as the appetizer.
he was a veteran of both World War I and World War II. Although in World War II, of course, he was fighting for the wrong side, but we'll let that pass. Very well regarded, very experienced guy, and everything looks great. He's bringing the Andrea Doria across the Atlantic. He's 12 hours out of New York. He's passing.
Oh, he's that close to New York.
Yeah, 12 hours from finishing the trip. It's late at night. We're in late July of 1956. It's 5 years into its service, and it's done well so far. As beautiful as it is, it does have a couple of anomalies that, like, for one thing, that they're supposed to do is, as they use up their fuel on the long trip, and as some of the fuel tanks get empty on one side, what they're really supposed to do to keep the ship totally stable is fill those empty fuel tanks with water to provide ballast on that side. But regularly because the fear is that if it ever does get hit by something, that if one side is much lighter than the other, that the ship will list severely, will lean over severely at a angle, like anything over a 15-degree angle is going to be problematic. Truth is, they know they're supposed to fill the tanks with seawater. They never do because it's a hassle. Like then when you get into New York and then you have to refuel, you have to empty out all that seawater. So they're kind of used to cutting that corner. The other corner that they are cutting that night.
First of all, when you hear cutting corners in a show about shipwrecks, I don't know is that a signal or a sign or a premonition?
There's so much blame to go around for what happens on this fateful night. That fog, dense fog, and apparently
dense fog. They're in a fog situation.
They're literally in a dense fog, and apparently that is something that happens in that shipping lane south of Nantucket. It's known for that.
Didn't that happen to Kennedy? Did he get lost in the airplane, like with the fog?
I was thinking about that. Was he going to Martha's Vineyard?
I think it was a navigation thing. It was fog, perhaps in the air, not necessarily in the boat.
That was so spooky because I just remember from the accounts of that crash that he had the thing where he thought up was down. It was so foggy. He just was like,
I never want to think up is down or down is up. I want to know exactly where I am all the time.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get like a little flavor of that in today's rec. Oh, Jesus,
Lizzie!
Oh my God, that's Lizzie
so
jumped
classic.
Right in.
But you know what? We haven't heard from Terry in a while. Let's take a brief pause.
It might be nice to get to Terry before we get into the sad part of this story. Also, Terry did tell me to say that I didn't get a chance to record this snippet, but he said Tuesdays are twice as nice right now at Terry's Turpentine. That on select home products you can get 2 for 1. So Tuesdays are twice as nice.
Is this part of our agreement? Or are you doing this sort of like, hey, I talked to Terry?
Gratis.
Wow. Okay, great.
Gratis.
Hey, I'm all for it. Terry's been a big supporter for a really long time. Anything we can do to help Terry, I'm on board.
Well, look, if he's giving, 2 for 1 deals for customers, why don't we give Terry a 2 for 1 deal on the ads?
Could not agree more. Technically, we're supposed to get Lizzie on board. Anyways, let's go to Terry, and then we'll come back and hear about the Andrea Doria.
Let's do it. Whether you're thinning varnish or paint, cleaning wood stains, making moth repellent at home, or just maintaining industrial equipment, Terry's Turpentine has you covered. Terry's Turpentine has been family-owned and operated since 1993. Terry's Turpentine, natural solvents of unnatural quality.
Wow, that's like
such a nice touch to ring out the end of the
Is that technically called an outro bell? I've never heard such a thing.
That's an outro bell.
Anyways, continue.
Okay, so fog can be an issue in that busy shipping lane south of Nantucket, and it was on that night, very dense fog.
Do we know anything about the clientele, the type of people who were on board at that point?
So glad you asked. We've got everything. We got fancy people staying up in the fancy berths. They include the actress Ruth Roman. That name means nothing to me, but she was a famous actress at the time.
I'm thinking Roman, not a specific person or actress.
So apparently she was a big actress, Ruth Roman.
Never heard of her.
I think she was a leading lady at that time. Others included some famous ballet dancers who had defected from
Russia?
They were Hungarian, I think,
Or
and
Hungarian?
they had defected from the Soviet bloc. And they were, anyway, they're up in the fancy class of births.
Very artistic.
There's also Cary Grant's wife is on the boat. Cary Grant's wife. And one
buried the lead there, right? Like you're talking about some rando dancers from Hungary or whatever, but you're like, Cary Grant's wife is on the ship?
Yeah, she's another actress I've never heard of. Cary Grant's wife is on board. The mayor of Philadelphia is on board. Mayor of Philly. This is the kind of dude that you may actually know his name. I did not. His name is Mike Stoller, and he's from a songwriting team that wrote some of Elvis's biggest
Mickey
hits.
Stoller or something like that. Mike.
Okay,
Mike.
Well,
the name is very familiar. So he was attributed to a lot of the hit songs in the 50s. Yes, that name sounds familiar, like a Nashville, like pumped out the tracks.
He was part of a songwriting duo. It's like
Totally.
Liebler Stoller.
That sounds so
like
familiar. Wow, incredible. Wait, he was not on board.
He is on board. So
no
he's
way.
Yeah. So it's a fancy boat. Now that's up in the fancy cabins.
Yeah. Oh wow.
But then down in the lower cabins you have people who are paying less. And a lot of the people down in the less expensive cabins are immigrants, people who are immigrating to the U.S. from
This is
Italy.
like the Titanic, right? Like, didn't they have the Irish, like the immigrants on the lower level? They were doing the dances and so on.
Yeah, I don't know if they did the whole thing where somebody naked gets sketched by a heartthrob. You know
that happened. Yes, with the jewels and whatnot.
With the jewels and Okay, so they're going through this dense fog, and another corner that gets cut that night is, one of the basic rules of the road on the high seas is you do reduce speed in dense fog.
Sure, makes sense.
There's a retired American admiral aboard who says to his daughter, this boat's going too damn fast for this fog.
Oh.
I will say, in Calamai's defense, at least first of all, he's in the correct shipping lane. For there's sort of a general understanding of boats coming west should be in this area, and boats that are going back east should be on this lane. And
driving on the wrong side of the road, as they say.
No, he's right. Yeah, but he's right. On the correct side of the road. He is going too fast in the fog. But one thing he is doing is he's sounding the foghorn. I think it's like every 100 seconds or something like that.
Like you're doing the right thing. Yeah.
I don't know how people are sleeping through that.
No. He's like, I'm coming through. Yes, I'm going a bit fast, but I'm going to blast my horn. Get out of the way if you think I'm going too fast.
And the other thing that he does, which is appreciated, and which the other ship, which I haven't told you about, does not do.
It's another ship?
This guy, Calamai, at least is on the deck. At least he's up there, with his other officers and overseeing, the ship in the fog. Unfortunately, there is a ship coming the other direction, which is not doing the same. It has not hit the super, super heavy fog yet, but it is going quite fast. It's a Swedish ship called the Stockholm.
And where is this? Where is it coming up now?
South of Nantucket, 50 miles south of Nantucket.
But how expansive is the area in which these two ships are going at each other?
Well, I'm about to tell you. Okay. So the Stockholm, for one thing, it itself is breaking some rules. It's in a lane about 20 miles north of where it's supposed to be. And that sounds bad, but ships back then were kind of in the habit of breaking this rule because you could shave some time off of your overall trip if you got up a little bit further north and took advantage of, the currents or the winds or whatever it was.
And you think of like the entire ocean and even a strait or even a certain coastline, like it's quite expansive.
It's huge. The boats in question are big. So, for instance, the very beautiful Andrea Doria is 700 feet long.
Wow.
And the Stockholm, coming the other direction, is 530 feet long. It doesn't have as many people on it, but it is north of where it's supposed to be. Okay,
Yeah.
so it is really technically in an area that's really supposed to be for eastbound traffic, or rather for westbound traffic. Whereas the Stockholm, which is going from New York back to Sweden and is traveling east, it should be 20 miles south of where it is. But
But
screw it.
on a freeway, would you say that it got on the wrong exit going the
Yeah.
wrong way? Like, is it that bad?
It's not quite as bad as that, but it is dangerous. It almost
Right.
is like, it would almost be like if you have one of those freeways where there's a big median in between the two directions, like driving on that median or something.
Right.
Or,
Well, I always wondered with, like, the midair collision. I'm like, guys, what?
how in the
Like, you got
world?
the
Exactly.
entire sky. Like, what? I don't there's no traffic. And now you're in the middle of the ocean. Like, can you?
You're in the middle of the ocean. Like, what are the odds? And I think that is part of what is probably going through some of these people's minds. It's like, yeah, we have things that we do to try to keep our ships safe, and we have some basic rules like slowing down in fog. But the reality is, what are the chances that
Right.
you're going to slam into something out here?
True. Good point. Like, I could totally see that. Guys, we've been down this lane how many times?
And especially if you're a guy like Calamite, who he's been doing this kind of thing his whole life, he knows his stuff. So Calamite is very experienced. The same cannot be said for the third in command on the Stockholm, who is left alone on the deck. It's the first time he's ever been on the deck in charge all by himself. His name, he loved the hyphens. His name was Johan Ernst Karstens Johansson. So both the first name and the last names are
That's a lot of
hyphenated.
hyphen.
Like, I would have just gone with Johan Johansson, but he needed to like shoehorn in the other names.
He obviously wasn't concerned about the jersey. Like, if I was ever going to market myself as like, I'm this hero, look at the back of my shirt.
His captain's jersey, the name starts like at the elbow and like ends at the other elbow.
Too
His
much.
captain's. And he had been left with under strict instructions from his captain. Hey, come wake me up if any of these things happen. If we start to see fog, come wake me up. If we get to where there's a boat that's like within a mile of us in any direction, come wake me up. He has a few things which this guy disregards.
Totally reasonable, by the way, right? It's within a mile. Just let me know.
Yeah. The real cardinal sin that this guy, Karstens Johansson, does is, both ships are outfitted with radar, but people are still somewhat new to that whole technology. And apparently back then anyway, it wasn't completely intuitive. Like, we see radar in the movies and it's like, oh yeah, there's that plane. You see the little light bleeping and you realize
like a great video game. Like, of course I know how to do this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, you can see that little bleeping light. That means somebody's near Tom Cruise's plane. Like, let's shoot at it. This guy, apparently it was not that intuitive, and that this guy, Karstens Johansson, made some basic mistakes in terms of like the scale of the radar image he was looking at. Basically, when he first started seeing the Andrea Doria on the radar, he thought it was like, I forget, 5 or 10 times farther away than it actually was. Like, his scale was way off.
Like, he didn't have one of those stickers that said objects in the rear are closer.
He should have. It should have said that. I mean, so many things had to go wrong on this night for what ended up happening for it to happen. But the other thing is, to the extent he was course correcting, actually both guys, to the extent they're course correcting, they're kind of both course correcting in the wrong direction.
Perfect storm.
So as the Stockholm approaches the heavy fog bank going at its full speed, and as the Andrea Doria starts to emerge from the heavy fog bank going at its full speed, they do see each other at the last minute. Now, with ships this big, as you know, you can't, stop them on a dime. So,
like, of course not. This is not like a car where you slam on the brakes.
So the Swedish ship, they try to like throw it into reverse or do whatever you can to like stop.
Particularly if there's a tow rope. Like, I'm not saying they would be water skiing at the time. Clearly not. But you know what I mean? Like, you never go in reverse when there's a tow rope because you can get it in the prop.
Yeah,
like,
are you
tie
kidding
up
me?
the rope.
Yeah. So the Swedish, he tries to stop. He's like, okay, throw the engines in reverse or whatever. Like, let's try to stop. The Italian boat tries to turn and outrun the collision. But the effect that has is they sort of open themselves up to being T-boned by the Stockholm.
Oh my God.
This is when I also tell you that the Stockholm, as a Swedish ship, which runs in cold waters a lot, has a reinforced prow for ice breaking.
Oh no, maximum damage.
Absolutely slams into the side about 1/3 of the way down from the bow. It slams into the side of the Andrea Doria and just opens it up like a tin can.
Oh my God. Wait, this was in the late 50s?
56.
This must have been a huge deal.
50 miles off the off the coast of Nantucket, south of Nantucket. It was a huge deal, and of course, news travel more slowly back then. Like, you didn't have news crews like out in helicopters. So
No, but wasn't this, I'm not saying on the level of a Titanic, but certainly like a huge story. This sounds like a big deal.
Absolutely huge deal. So the Stockholm rips open a huge hole in Andrea Doria, and the place where it slams into includes a lot of passenger compartments.
Ugh.
So you have all these crazy stories. Like, there's one guy who I think is a colonel or something in the American military, or maybe he's a retired colonel, who has stepped to the bathroom to brush his teeth. He survives, but his wife does not. Like, he comes back out of the bathroom and his wife has been killed.
Wow.
There's a 14-year-old girl named Linda Morgan, whose father was a famous newscaster in America.
Mm-hmm.
And she and her mom, her stepfather, is in bed asleep on the Andrea Doria. The collision happens. She gets thrown onto the Stockholm. So when the ships separate, when the Stockholm starts going in reverse and pulls apart, she's presumed dead for hours. People figure she's in the water or whatever. And they even tell her father, who's a newscaster back in America, your daughter's lost at sea, presumed dead. Turns out she's actually on board the Stockholm now. And she's rescued from the damaged prow of the Stockholm, and she turns out to be okay.
Wow.
Linda Morgan, 14 years old, broken arm, but that's it.
Unbelievable. Was there a movie? Has this been like...
I do know that there was the Seinfeld show episode called The Andrea Doria, where George is trying to get an apartment in a certain building, and he's going to lose out because the co-op board wants to rent instead to this woman who has a whole sob story about having survived the Andrea Doria 40 years ago. And so he's like competing, and he's trying to come up with a narrative about why he's more worthy than this woman who survived the wreck of the Andrea Doria.
Oh my God, that is hilarious.
Okay, when the collision happens that night, 46 people on the Andrea Doria are dead, most of them pretty much immediately, and 5 people on the other ship, on the Stockholm, are killed.
Wow.
But it's considered one of the most successful coordinated rescues of all time, because the Andrea Doria immediately sends out its distress signals, and the captain, Calamai, is very calm, but he says, need all available assistance immediately, situation dire. And so a series of boats reverse course or just steam at full speed to get to the site, including a boat called the Cape Anne, a French boat called the Ile de France, a couple of American military boats. They wind up rescuing 1,660 people from the Andrea Doria.
Wow.
Some were most of them were in lifeboats. There was a problem. One of the things that happened with the Andrea Doria, because they had never followed the guideline about filling up the empty fuel tanks with seawater, one side of the boat was much lighter than the other. So when the accident happened, the boat went listed at a really severe angle, more than 20 degrees. So if you imagine you're on the deck, people said to get it anywhere on the deck, you were
ouch,
sort of on your back, sliding down feet first, trying not to slide too fast so that you would shoot over and then into the water.
It's a nightmare.
But being at this severe an angle also meant that all of the lifeboats, which were on the side that was sticking way up in the air, were unusable because they couldn't get them from that far up in the air down to the water. So they were already down to 50% of their available lifeboats.
Ooh.
Now, the good thing...
Good thing. I want to hear what this is.
Well, there's some good things. I mean, let's look at the numbers. 1,660 people were rescued,
Yes, good point.
46 died. That's a bummer. But 1,660, I think compared to the Titanic, everybody sort of viewed this as the Andrea Doria, it took it 10 or 11 hours actually to go underwater. And so that allowed plenty of time to get people off the ship.
Gather your passport. Well, I wonder, because we did talk about last week with the Mary Rose, was it the death rate was over 90%, which is a terrible percentage.
Yeah, of course, that was 500 years ago. So by now, they've got these airtight compartments built into the hull.
You're saying that on Seinfeld, they made fun of the people because it wasn't as tragic as perhaps the death rate of other shipwrecks.
No. This woman was just saying like, hey, you should rent me this apartment. Like, look at me. I'm a survivor of the Andrea Doria rescue. Now it does become a point of humor later in that episode because George looks it up, I guess, of course, Kramer being the oddball, like has a book on, oceanic disasters, and he already knew all about it. And he tells people the facts, and George is like, wait a minute. So 1,660 people were rescued, right? Like, and only 40 died. Like, so George has the same reaction you're having, where he's like, okay,
It's
so
it's like a bus accident. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's like better. Yeah, more people die of the flu.
Tough argument, I guess, because if you're there, it's like, okay, well, you didn't live through it.
But basically, the Andrea Doria does a good job staying afloat. Of its 11 airtight compartments built into the hull, only one of them is pierced. And that does lead to a long time before it goes fully underwater. The captain is the last guy on the boat. He does not want to leave the boat. He's has to be talked into coming into a lifeboat. He's just utterly distraught. He thinks maybe there's still people left on board. He won't get off the boat. He's literally like the last guy on the boat. They finally get him to come off, and he is just absolutely haunted by it for the rest of his life. He never takes command of a boat again. He doesn't want to. And at his deathbed, right before he dies, allegedly the last thing he says before he dies is, so all of the passengers are safe.
Oh, wow. That's like, it's like you can't make this stuff up.
There's plenty of fault to go around, and certainly when this happened, there was still some lingering prejudice toward Italy over World War II, and people were more sort of inclined to say, oh, the Italians probably screwed this up somehow.
Finger point.
And, there were court cases over it. And as it turned out, both ships were covered by the same insurer, Lloyd's of London. And so Lloyd's of London...
Hey guys, let's mediate.
Yeah, because the trial is getting really nasty. And not only are both companies going after each other and saying it was the other one who screwed up, but both countries are starting to sort of get involved in the fight. And Lloyd's of London says, let's settle this. We represent both of you. Let's do an out-of-court settlement. Right. And what that leads to in the short run is there's no official determination of who was at fault. It seems in hindsight like the Swedish third in command, Karstens Johansson, was definitely much more at fault and just did not understand how the radar operated on his ship.
So ultimately, you believe that the blame went on the guy with the multiple hyphens. He was to blame for not being able to interpret the radar and therefore put himself and his passengers in danger. Is that ultimately what they determined?
Absolutely. And also disregarded his captain's instructions. One of them was, hey, look, if you start to see fog, come get me. Another one is, if you think there's a ship within a mile, come get me.
Yeah.
And, it also, the Swedish ship was 20 miles north of where it was supposed to be. So now the Stockholm, amazingly, they do wind up fixing up the Stockholm, and it remains in service to this day. It's no
What?
longer called the Stockholm. It's changed ownership a few
Do
times.
people know the history when they get on board?
Good question. Although if you think about it, it took that collision like a champ and still was able
True,
to.
like a battering ram. If you're in
Yeah.
some sort of competition, it's like, hey, let's get on that ship.
Yeah, it was able, I think, to turn around and steam back to New York, even though it
Right.
didn't
Like
look good.
later, hey,
Yeah.
sorry about the dent. What?
The Ile de France, that boat, which
The
was one of
French boat.
the French boat, which was one of the 6 that raced to the scene, got special respect and credit when it got there. That captain, and I can't remember his name, was very expert. He was worried. He said, "Listen, we got to be careful. There's a lot of boats in this tiny little area right now,
Right.
and there's still some fog, so we got to do this right." But he is very gutsy and maneuvers very close to the Andrea Doria. He also lights up his entire ship. People who were on the
Wow.
Andrea Doria said, the moment when I knew I was going to live was when that French boat came and just
No
put on
way.
all its lights, and I just had this feeling like I'm going to make it. You know, I see that ship
Wow.
over there. There are people who are
Incredible.
figuring out how to get me. I'm going to make it. So the Ile de France was...
Isn't that a very cinematic moment? Like, how is that not in a movie? Like, this has been depicted in a movie?
a million books have been written about it.
But a movie, like, come on. Like, with the light
I
up,
think
with the
part
ship.
of the, I think part of the plot line of Poseidon Adventure, is sort of borrowing from aspects of the Andrea Doria. But the Andrea Doria is as much of a clusterfuck as it was the actual collision. The fact that so many people survived was considered a
Pretty
victory
good.
for the safety measures which were put into place after the Titanic.
Right. Again, if you're part of that 49 or the families of that of the 40,
The
whatever,
46.
46, whatever, you're like, can you guys be quiet? Will you keep talking about how great this is? It's not great.
Well, the other thing is there are lots of people among the survivors who assume that members of their family have died because they get separated during the rescue.
Oh, wow.
And their loved ones get rescued by a different ship. And so it's not until like days later in New York that they realize like, oh, my son.
It's a matter of like comparing rescue ships, right? Oh, you were on a French ship. You had French food. We got captured, or we were rescued by a Spanish ship. We had Spanish food.
The paella didn't agree with my stomach, but I was still glad, for the
They
blankets.
did
and
have
everything.
bathrooms on board, obviously.
Which was good because the food was very spicy. I'm not used to the Spanish food.
A long line for the latrine.
The music was not as good on the Swedish ship, for instance, as on the French and Spanish ship. Okay, here's one fact about the Andrea Doria that really drew me to this wreck. This shipwreck continues to kill people to this day.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Where it landed under the water is an absolutely treacherous spot. It's like 230 feet down. So
wow,
it's a little too deep for your garden variety, like recreational diver. You have
we're
to
not
be,
going there.
We're definitely.
I'll watch a video.
So part of what makes it treacherous is that heavy currents in that area. Bad visibility, 230 feet down, and because of the strong current and because of the massive amount of damage that was done to the ship that night, the ship has deteriorated through the years and continues to deteriorate. It's described as a very loud wreck. If you dive it, you can hear metal grinding against metal or metal grinding against the sea floor. Like it's a shipwreck that feels like stuff is continuing to collapse or could collapse at any
Zero interest in being anywhere near there.
Of the 22 people who have died diving on the wreck since then,
my gosh,
a big number of them have been from decompression sickness. Like you've got to come up super slowly if you dive that deeply or that deep. So people who come up too quick can die of the bends.
Whoa. And what were they looking for? Like, are they bringing something up from the ship? Were they looking for belongings located in the cabin like the Titanic? Like, why go down that point?
It's sort of all of the above. Some people want to, especially Italian divers, divers are very fascinated by this wreck. The ship played a big part in the national imagination.
It's not like my grandparents left their keys. I need the extra keys.
Yeah, but people are, they want to see what they can get from the wreck. One diver was able to find one of the bells, one of the ship bells,
Wow.
and able to rig that and have it brought up. Now, one thing is that, sometimes in a shipwreck you'll hear, well, the safe or the vault probably held this and this and this.
Right.
They think in the Andrea Doria, maybe less so because they were only 12 hours out from port. So they think a lot of people had already claimed their valuables and had already started to pack up their stuff and were getting ready to disembark the next day. So that reduced the number of people saying like, we got to get the ship safe or got to bring that up. It sounds like a terrifying wreck to dive on. There are these passageway, like one diver got caught in a passageway or his line got caught in a long corridor and he could never get back out. But the very difficulty of, in fact, because of this stuff about having to come back up to surface so slowly, really you're looking at a total of maybe 15 minutes of really good dive time on the wreck on a good day, like when there's visibility and everything.
Totally not worth it. But did Cary Grant's wife survive?
Yes.
She did?
She did survive.
Wow. Oh, interesting. Okay, good.
The treacherousness of the dive, paradoxically, is part of what draws divers to it. So it's described as the Mount Everest of shipwrecks. And so divers pride themselves on having gone down to that wreck. But you really have to know your stuff. Otherwise, you could wind up. Because if you think about it, so 46 died on the night of the collision on the Andrea Doria, and 22 more have died since then trying to go down to look at it.
Wow, that's not a good ratio.
Yeah, I feel like that's not on our list of ones that we're going to...
Totally not. Again, a video, not of any of the tragedies associated with the dives, but certainly to see the wreck. Like, I'm curious what the ship looks like.
And just imagine that night. I think the cinematic thing is exactly correct. Like with the heavy, heavy fog.
Terrible. Like, it's so scary. Yeah, it's incredible.
Oh, and then and so there's the dude I mentioned, the retired admiral, who turns to the daughter and says that, we're going too fast in this fog. But there's even a woman who at breakfast the morning before the wreck tells her daughter, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed there was an accident, but I was on the Cape Ann. I wasn't on the Andrea Doria. And sure enough, she, later after the collision is rescued by the Cape Ann. But the daughter swears like, yeah, she told me that dream in the morning that she wound up on the Cape Ann.
Just sounds so scary that it seems like a perfect movie because it's so scary with the fog. Like you can't see, like you don't know what's coming. And then all of a sudden.
And then how about the little girl?
Horrible.
Like she's asleep and then everybody assumes she died. And in fact,
Linda,
14 years old. They informed her dad, the newscaster, that his daughter was lost and presumed dead. And he gave the newscast that night, I think it's on the radio, and doesn't mention that his daughter was involved with it. He just like straight ahead, old school newsman. These two ships have collided, we're awaiting reports. She was a 1 in a million because she was one who was literally transposed. She was put onto, she wound up on the other ship.
Incredible. It is incredible. That is a 1 in a million. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what was going through her head? Excuse me, what ship am I on now?
She says, when the rescuers reach her, she said, I went to sleep on the Andrea Doria. Where am I now?
Seriously, you put that in a movie, it's like, wait, woke up on the wrong ship.
And the dude who was in the bathroom brushing his teeth and his wife gets, killed in the collision. They actually saw that woman's body on the wreckage of the prow of the Stockholm, and they started to try to get to it, but then that wreckage fell off into the ocean. So they believe she was already dead, but they, had spotted that woman and were sort of working down toward her, and then the stuff just fell down into the water.
Wow, that is incredibly tragic.
The other thing that strikes me is it's like all these things like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. The reinforced prow, it'll break through the ice. It's like the unintended consequence of it ripping a huge hole in the beautiful Andrea Doria.
Right.
Part of what drew me to it, as I said at the beginning, is this idea that it's continuing to kill
Right.
people. And that part of what's going on there is that it is, like you say, such a sort of cinematic,
Incredible
such a
story. Yes.
fascinating event that I think that's part of what draws people back to try to dive on it. And like I said, a lot of the divers on it are Italian just because they have that connection to the ship.
See,
And then just the that 230 feet down, it's just it happened to land in just a perfectly treacherous spot.
so no thoughts of raising it. Like there's no way to like they never thought about bringing it up.
It's falling.
Yeah.
No, it's way too
Right.
dangerous to work on this ship, and it's falling apart. If it had just been a few miles in a different direction, it would have gone into thousands
Wow.
and thousands of feet deep in the water because it's right on the continental shelf. So you go a little further and it
Right.
just
It's
drops
just
off a
teetering.
cliff
Yeah.
and you're looking down into the abyss. So yeah, I think it would be too dangerous to do any kind of recovery efforts. Also, it's not like a ship from like 500 years ago or
Right.
1,000
Where it
years
has
ago. It's like,
historical significance.
it's from 1956. Yeah.
Still incredible. I
like-
mean, so people are still going there.
Oh yeah, very popular. In a way, Everest is a good comparison because it's like people die
True.
on Mount
Yeah.
Everest every year. One of the other dangers down there is something called nitrogen necrosis or
No, thank
narcosis
you.
or something that happens where nitrogen builds up too much in your body and you pass out.
Were they able to get anything from the ship? Like, are there any relics that are on display or like any artifacts?
No, in fact, it seems like more what these people are doing is to go down there and either take footage or just to be able to say that they dived the Andrea Doria. And
Got it.
it's quite a production to make that dive. And sometimes they get down there and the visibility is just no good.
Terrible.
So, they can see a couple feet in front of them and they're just, able to make out the outline of the hull or, a big shape like, oh, this is, part of the boiler room or whatever. But like I said, the guy, it was considered a big coup, the guy who rigged up the ship bell a few years ago and brought the bell up to the surface.
That's pretty cool.
They did have a life-size sculpture of the original, famous Genoese navigator in the 1600s or
No way.
1500s, Andrea Doria, and that sculpture also.
Oh, that's who it's named after.
Yeah, that's who it's named after, and they did recover that sculpture and
Oh,
bring
that's
it up.
cool.
Yeah, that's not nothing. I mean,
That's more than
it was
something.
detached at the ankles, so you don't get the feet, but you get the
Right.
rest of the life-size
You
sculpture.
can piece it together, like suspend your disbelief. I mean, you're only talking about the feet are missing.
You
Right?
want to get the best workmen to try to put on the new feet. Like you don't want it to be super obvious. You can't like throw Nikes on him or some kind of footwear that wasn't appropriate to the, you know what I mean? Get some professors
Doesn't
involved.
have to be age appropriate or time appropriate.
I feel bad that the Italian captain was sweating it all those years later and that the Swedish guys seemed to sort of skate. Unlike Porcalamine, the Swedish officers went on and continued their careers in navigation and worked on ships and all that.
Right.
I feel that they did not get their full share of blame.
Right. They're like, what's the problem?
Yeah, and they wanted to muddy the water with just sort of like, as I said, there was the whole anti-Italian thing after World War II. So they were sort of like, oh, and it's one of those disasters where as they get closer to the moment of impact, they're all doing the exact wrong thing. Like they're turning toward each other. And then the dude right before impact, like says, oh, we can outrun it.
Terrible.
And the dude who's the Italian guy who's like, yeah, I'm going to turn really hard to, and try to outrun the collision. Like he opens the ship up perfectly. So it just gets T-boned almost perfectly.
This is not bumper cars. Like, what are you doing? Can you just guys both just not cut it this close?
It's kind of like if you're walking towards somebody on the sidewalk and you both step to the side, you're trying to avoid them, and you both keep like stepping to the wrong side and it's awkward. It's that, but it's just like 1,500 people.
I know he's going to go right. I'm going to go left. No, but if I go left, he'll go right. It's like, guys, stop it.
The other thing is if they're sounding the foghorn every 100 seconds, it's like, how do you not hear that?
But just commit early. Like to me, it's like if you just commit early, I'm going this way. Do you see me going this way? I'm not wavering. I'm going this way.
As they were running out of time to avoid the disaster, both of them simultaneously doing everything to make it actually inevitable that they would collide.
Making the wrong decisions, yeah. Were there lawsuits for, like, negligence? Was this like
Oh, yes, absolutely. All kinds of lawsuits. And that's when the insurance company steps in and finally does a global
okay,
settlement
right,
because they said there's so much bad
right.
PR and there's so much mudslinging between the two sides that they say look, this is hurting all of us and it's going to drive up the amount of the
Right.
award. So let's
But you
settle
were
it.
saying that it's the same insurance company represented both sides? So how does that work?
Yes,
Like, how does
Lloyd's of
that doesn't
London.
seem fair.
They settle with them. So the passengers or
Mhm.
whoever the people are who are suing, they and I assume both the respective cruise lines were suing each
Got it.
other as well. But Lloyd's of London, as sort of having clients on both sides, they help kind of in a diplomatic way. They sort of help come up with a global
Oh, I see.
resolution. Like, listen, there's not gonna be a finding of fault. There's just gonna be a paying out of money. We will
Right.
pay out X amount to you and X amount to you, but we're not going to get into who was ultimately at
Okay,
fault.
so avoid bad PR, but at least accept some responsibility via the payment.
Subsequent, like years later, both scholarly and technical analysis do suggest that it was the Swedish ship which was more at fault, especially the dude who was Karstens Johansson, who was just having trouble reading the radar.
So it really did come down to the radar. Like, the analysis proves that had he done the right thing, he would have understood which direction to go.
Yeah, in fact, it's sometimes described as the first radar assisted collision or the first radar assisted disaster in the sense that he was making decisions based on radar, but based on a faulty reading of the radar. So, in a sense, the
Oh,
radar was
shoot.
contributing to the accident
Right.
because he was looking at it and he was thinking he knew where the ship was. And in a sense, he might have been even better off at that point if he wasn't looking at it and he was just making some basic decisions based on what he could see or hear.
Right.
It does remind me of what you mentioned at the beginning of the of our conversation, which was JFK Jr. in the
Right.
plane, which I forget. Did it have instruments?
Yeah, I don't recall. I
I
know
don't
that
remember
it
what
was
it was.
definitely one of those, like the fog. He wasn't licensed maybe to fly by instrument.
He wasn't rated for instruments or something, but I do think it was
Unfortunate.
exactly like what you're talking about, where you don't know which way is
Right. You
which.
lose perspective of the horizon. Yeah.
And in Kennedy's thing, he thought in the plane accident, he thought he was pulling up into the climbing in the sky, and
Terrible.
he was actually driving it straight toward the ocean.
Terrible.
One thing I want to add, already mentioned the Seinfeld episode, but the Andrea Doria also, there are some songs about it. There was a Polish rock band, which I will not even try to pronounce, which recorded a song in 1969 called the Andrea Doria. The wreck of the Andrea Doria is also alluded to in a Steely Dan song called Things I Miss the Most from their 2003 album, Everything
Interesting.
Must Go. A Brazilian rock band called Legião Urbana recorded the song Andrea Doria on their 1986 album. Tom Clancy once wrote a book where one of the plot points was that an American sub is sort of positions itself next to the wreckage of the Andrea Doria so that enemy ships or Soviet sonar detection technology will think, oh, that's just the wreckage of the Andrea Doria over there, and they won't pick up the submarine. Clive Cussler has also put it in some of his books. The 1969 adventure novel, The Poseidon Adventure, mentions the wreck of the Andrea Doria in at several points. So it did, especially back then, it had a hold on the popular imagination. And with that many people getting rescued, like 1,600, I mean, if you just think about it, like then all those people fan out into the world with their stories about, oh, you'll never believe what happened to me,
Right. It's not as rare as the Titanic, but still a great story. I mean, you survive a shipwreck or you have a relative that survives a shipwreck. That's pretty dramatic.
Kind of a bummer rumor that the beautiful ship, the one that was known as the most beautiful passenger liner operating at that time, that's the one that gets wrecked and goes underwater.
Right. That's
Whereas the smaller, less remarkable Stockholm continues to operate until this
right.
day.
That just has like like the duct tape on the front, like where it hit the Andrea Doria, but it's fine otherwise.
Yeah, it was able. I mean, well, the amazing thing is, if you look at images, it does look like the front of the boat has been sheared off. So, it's sort of like, how in the
Wow.
world did it get back to New York? It doesn't look like it would have been able to do that.
Yeah.
There was a news photographer for the Boston Traveler newspaper who won a Pulitzer Prize taking a photo of the Andrea Doria right at the moment when it finally goes under
You're
after
kidding.
10 to 11 hours of it, listing at a severe angle. It finally goes under, and this guy Harry Trask took a photo that shows the ship going under.
I can't wait to check this out. That's incredible. Was it during the day when it went under, or was this like lit up at night?
No, it was during the day.
Okay. Wow.
I mean, most of the collision and the rescue and all that happened at night, but by the time it goes under for good, it's like 10 a.m.
Wow.
There was also a Chrysler one-off prototype of a new car that was going to be called the Norseman, and it was inside the 50-car garage on the Andrea
No.
Doria. And so when that went down and was lost forever, they just scrapped that whole line. So there was a one-time prototype, the Chrysler Norseman, which never got made.
No way. And
Yeah.
that's on the Andrea Doria?
Yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't at least made an attempt to bring up the car. Don't you think? Like,
Yeah, there is some footage of from divers who've gone down there. The wreck is not in great condition. That's why I was kind of blown away about your wreck last week. Delicate things like fiddles they were able to recover.
totally.
Whereas this one looks like it's falling apart pretty fast. I mean, it only wrecked like 60, 70 years ago,
Right.
but it's already in really bad
Currents,
shape.
like as you described.
And also that there was a huge hole in the side of the ship,
That doesn't
like
help.
with the with the Vasa and with the Mary Rose,
Yes.
they fill up with water through the gun ports, but I think like the ship basically goes down
You're
as
right.
a whole.
They do, and that's why they were able to recover such a high percentage of the overall ship. But great ship. I mean, this is a crazy story.
It's considered the greatest sea rescue in history just because of the number of people who were successfully rescued.
Right.
But as you point out, that's just sort of a flip side of like, okay, but also just a colossal group of bad decisions that night. Like, how in the middle of a huge ocean do two huge boats slam into each other?
Tough to accept. Yeah. Because again, as you say, it's not like a battle. It wasn't like this was a time of great distress, like, whoa. It's like, guys, just go slower and honk your horn and everyone commit to a direction. Like, this is not like it's not sophisticated maritime technology. It's a matter of, I'm going this way. Like, you're going left.
And I'm intrigued by the idea of it being a radar assisted collision in the sense that, like, I wonder if neither ship had radar, if they actually almost would have been better off. Like, maybe it gave a false sense of security. Like the Swedish guy who goes to sleep, he's like, well, we got the radar. We can leave, Johan Ernst in charge of it because we do have the machines now and the technology.
Right. Excuse me, sir. Do you mind looking up? No, I'm looking at the radar. No, but do you mind looking up because it's a ship coming right at us? No, I'm looking at the radar and that ship is on the left.
Yeah, the radar says we're fine. We got 10 miles. The Andrea Doria had two sets of radar machines or displays, and that was like the latest technology.
Well, it sounds like it's the Swedish that didn't know how to interpret the radar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great ship. And I'm not going to tease next week, incidentally, because I haven't decided. As you know, there's so many right now that we've been discussing offline. Hard to know what's coming next week.
I have one final question to ask. Do you have any desire to go on one of these? Like, this does feel like it was the era when the passenger liner was still like a glamorous thing.
Yeah, I don't. Like, and the funny thing is, I was watching some show recently and it occurred to me that I would never want to go on an any of these type of cruises or luxury ships of any kind at all.
Yeah, because a lot of those cruise ships, like when people like go to Alaska or they,
Nope.
go to the Caribbean, those things are like hopping around sort of, they're not going out across the heart of the ocean. You know what I
Right.
mean? They're going like from island to island, or they're going
Right.
along the coast from port to port, but they're not going through like, there's part of me that would be curious to do that just to see what it feels like being in the middle of the Atlantic at night.
I mean, maybe like going, from New York to Great Britain or go to like whatever,
Mhm.
Liverpool. Like that would be kind of cool. But it also, no, thank you. Like, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could do it now that we've done 3 seasons of the podcast, because now it's like every little thing would be in my mind. Like, oh shit, you know what? It's a leap year, and whenever David does a wreck, it's a leap year,
The irony of these guys do a shipwreck, and guess what? They went down in a shipwreck. I mean, we can't.
Yeah,
That's
it's
like going
guaranteed.
to happen.
Yeah.
Great episode. Appreciate it. Let's play our outro music and another shipwreck next week.
Sounds good.
Life jackets are stored